First off, a special thank you to Rebbe Avram, who is now officially taking over the camera and the tech for the Tuesday night cheer. So, shkoyach to Rebbe Avram, shkoyach. Topic this evening is the last Nazir, the secret world of HaRav HaNazir Dovid Cohen, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. Now, somebody already told me he was not the last Nazir, because Eli Stefansky interviewed a Nazir recently when the Daf Yomi did the Masechta. So we'll call it the second to last Nazir, right? The secret world of HaRav HaNazir Dovid Cohen. This topic came up. We mentioned a story about the Nazir on Shabbos and Shavuos, and I had more than a handful of people asking me, who was the Nazir? I never heard of him before. So that inspired me to spend the time to put together a little bit of the basic life story of the Nazir. Figured it's PARSHAS NASO, so it works out perfectly. Now, a lot of what we're going to learn tonight is going to be in that category of don't try this at home, right? To be inspired and to try to apply it in our own way, what works for us in our unique Avodas Hashem. The Ralbag begins by giving us the evolution of the Parsha. We have a discussion about Geneva, of stealing, and ways to repay, and then we have a discussion of the Sota, someone who is not loyal to her husband, and then we have the discussion of the Nazir. So the Ralbag explains, he says, the Parsha is starting off with the ultimate view of society, giving us basic guidelines, how to interact with each other, how to have shalom. Then it speaks about the Sota, which is more focused on shalom bayis, because, explains the Ralbag, it's impossible to have shalom hamadina without having shalom bayis. But then it goes to Nazir, because that's really the source of everything. Shezosa parshahu lahashkid hariva hefsid me'adam ba'atzmo. The whole discussion of Nazir is when somebody feels this inner turmoil, a conflict within themselves, v'hashkata zehariv, quieting this turmoil, that brings to shalom ba'atzmo. So the only way to really achieve shalom bayis, to have a healthy and happy marriage, is to be happy and healthy with oneself. So Nazir can lead to shalom bayis, which ultimately can lead to shalom hamadina and world peace. Now it's interesting when you learn through the Masechta Mishnayos Nazir, if somebody takes an oath of Nazirus, how long does that last for if he doesn't specify? Stam Nazirus Shloshim Yom, 30 days. And yet the Torah seems to make a fairly big deal out of taking the oath of Nazirus. What does that mean practically? So not that much. You're not shaving, you're not getting a haircut, you're refraining from wine, grape juice, anything made from grapes, and you're not being matameh l'mesim, you're not going to a cemetery. Those are the three main restrictions we find by Nazirus. Yet, at the end of this period, assuming Stam Nazirus Shloshim Yom, 30 days later, then we have the procedure, and we know included in this procedure is bringing a chatas. And there are many different reasons why. What sin did you commit by becoming a Nazir and now going back to your normal life? The Ramban explains that once you were in this mode, you ascended to the level of Nazirus. You were in touch with an inner conflict, with this turmoil, and you wanted to quiet that noise within you, and therefore you took the oath of Nazirus. So now, you're a changed human being. You're a different person. By choosing to go back to your regular life, it might be the right move, because for you and your life circumstance, it doesn't make sense to be a Nazir forever. But l'maisa, there's a yerida, right? You are now lowering the level, therefore bring a chatas.
Why do you assume that you all life at the same level?
So it's interesting. the Sam Derech, Reb Simcha Zisel Brody, he says another chazal we find why you bring a chatas is because you were porish, you had to separate from yayin. And l'maisa, practically speaking, we know that the world is here for us to enjoy, obviously in measure, in a healthy way. But Rav Simcha Zisel has the following question. How do we assume both of these ideas are true? On one hand, you have to bring a carbon because you're now having yerida. You're going down from that state of being a Nazir. On the other hand, choosing to become a Nazir in the first place was somewhat problematic because you're avoiding some of those pleasures of life which you're allowed to and you should partake of. So how are both of those ideas true? I want to come back to this in Mirz Hashem. But I want to jump into the world of HaRav HaNazir Dovid Cohen. Dovid Cohen was born in 1887, and I want to begin his story really with the end of his life. Take a look on page 2. This is written by his son, Rav Shar Yoshev Cohen, speaking about his father during his last few weeks fighting the disease that ultimately took his life. Abba Mari Zal, during the difficulty of his illness, he would tell us, Be'erev Shabbos Kodesh Kora Osi al Mitaso, he called me to his bed at Erev Shabbos, Chiyuch Shel Nora al Panav, and he had this wide smile on his face, and he said to me, why are you afraid? Why are you in pain? She'abba Shelcha Yelech Min Ha'olam? Are you afraid that your father is going to leave this world? And he continued, and he said, you don't have to be bitzar. You don't have to be in pain. And he explained as follows. Anachnu anshe emes. We are people of truth. And this, as we'll see throughout the Nazir's life, was really his whole focus. He was a mevakesh emes. He wanted to arrive at deeper levels of truth. So anachnu anshe emes. Ein sheker godol yoser be'olam min hamavis. There is nothing as sheker, as false, in this world as death. Death is sheker. Ein mavis ba'olam klal, yesh rak chayim. There is no such thing as death, there is only life. Hashichra meyiras hamavis. And if you live with this understanding, that the sheker of mavis, the illusion of death, is the source of so much anxiety and fear within every human being, if you're able to free yourself from that fear by looking past this illusion and realizing there is no such thing as mavis. There is olam hazeh, there's olam haba. There's my chiyus, there's my life, there's my vitality in this world, and then eventually, whenever that time is, I transition to another realm. But mavis, in the way that we view it, is sheker muchla. That's an illusion. As soon as you see the world for what it is, you could alleviate the fear of death. In the Oros HaKodesh, this is a sefer of Rav Kook that the Nazir really put together over many years. Rav Kook writes, Mashu b'nei adam kore mavis, harehu rak, tigboras hachayim v'titz ma'usam. That which people call death is really only the strengthening and the expanding of life. And the classic mashal we find is that within the womb there's some level of consciousness, there's some level of chiyus, and when the child comes out la'avir ha'olam, into the reality of this world, it might seem like death from inside the womb, but obviously following this little child from inside its mother, now here in the real world, so to speak, that's a deeper, more significant, that's a more real chiyus than there was before. That's what Rav Dovid Cohen explained to his son, Rav Shar Yoshev, don't be afraid of me dying, because there's no such thing as death. His son goes on to explain, he says, Lo haya adam shesimcha sachayim haisa shorish nishmaso v'yesod kol mu'uyav. I've never met anyone in my life who had this deep-rooted, pure joy of life like my father. It was simple. It was pure. Hamusag shel ava hayakolel etzelas hakol. There was a love. There was a love of Bnei Yisrael. There was a love of his family, of his wife, of his children. There is a love of humanity. And this love, explains Rav Shar Yoshev Cohen, really emanated from his deep-rooted love of Hashem, which was his life's goal. He quotes his father, the Nazir, who said, "Hapiska hatachlis shel kol ha'avoda hu avas Hashem." And this is something we know from many earlier sources, that the goal of all of our avodas Hashem is to come to a place where there's a real relationship of love between myself and the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Va'avas Hashem gedola hi dafka avas Hashem hakolelis. Real love of God means it's not limited, it's not elite, it's not exclusive, but it's an ava that's kolelis, that through this love, she'ohavim kol Yisrael, kol ha'adam, and kol ha'omim v'chol ha'olam, that branches out into almost this universal embrace of all of humanity, coming from that deep-rooted source of Avas Hashem. It's interesting. The Rambam, when he speaks about the mitzvahs aseh of Avas Hashem, the third of the positive mitzvahs, he writes that included in the mitzvah of Avas Hashem is a love for humanity. Because if I really have this yearning and longing to come closer to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, then intuitively I want to bring others there with me. I want other people to partake of this love. I don't want to keep it for myself. He concludes here in his memoir that he remembers early in the morning hearing his father daven, and we'll see this is going to be very significant when we read the first meeting that his father had with Rav Kook. But Abba Mori ba'ashmoras haboker olah hashamayma, it was as if he ascended to heaven every morning. One who was zocha to hear his nagunim as he was davening, b'shas halimud, as he was learning. Shama es hashir el Yona, they were exposed to this angelic shir, hashira shenimshacha mamish ad rega achron, a shir that lasted with him, a song that he would actually keep to the very last day. And towards those last days, he would have his talmidim around him, checking on him, taking care of him, and he would always ask them, sing something, sing a nigun, sing a shir. And inevitably they would ask the Nazir, what nigun should we sing? And his answer would be, Yibonei HaMikdash. We'll see that in the whole worldview of the Nazir, especially his influence initially from the Chafetz Chaim and then eventually from Rav Kook, the yearning of Geula was very much on the forefront of his mind. He was related to the Chafetz Chaim. His grandfather was actually the Rav of Radin together with the Chafetz Chaim, and they had a mutual respect for each other. And when he was a young man, he actually went to the yeshiva in Radin and learned together with the great Chafetz Chaim. One story that Rav Dovid Cohen told his family of what the Chafetz Chaim shared with him, he said, the Chafetz Chaim told me personally that initially I would daven Shmon Esrei and say the bracha of Yushalayim Ircha Barachim Tashu as Tzemach David, and I would view it as davening. We're praying for the Geula, we're looking forward, we're anticipating the redemption. However, the Chafetz Chaim continued and said, but more recently, and what year this is, it's not clear, but more recently, I realized in Yechoshev, Hine ze ot, hine achshav korov mamish. Chafetz Chaim said, I feel it so close. It's no longer a tefillah, but it's a metzius, it's a reality. I feel it's coming. Im ze yeh b'yomai eini yodeya. The Chafetz Chaim told Rav Dovid Cohen, if this happens in my time, I'm not sure. However, it will at least begin to happen in your time. Yerushalayim ircha barachim tashu. This will begin to happen in your time. Vadai, vadai, vadai. What's interesting is when you fast forward, whenever this conversation took place, sometime before in 1933 when the Chofetz Chaim passed away, likely in the early 1900s, now we fast forward to June of 1967 during the Six-Day War, and Yom Yerushalayim, the miracles that took place getting back Yerushalayim and the Har HaBayis, the Nazir was one of the first people to actually have the opportunity to daven at the Kosel. The picture here, you can see on the bottom of page 4, on the far left is Reb Tzvi Yehuda Kook, that's Reb Kook's son. In the center and the front, that's Reb Shlomo Goren, who was eventually the son-in-law of the Nazir. He was the chief rabbi of the IDF, very interesting, controversial personality. But in the back, you could see with those glasses, that's the Nazir davening at the Kosel in 1967. So you could imagine, explains his son Rav Shah Yoshuv, Kishezacha b'yom hagadol shel geulas Yerushalayim. When we were zocha to have the redemption of Yerushalayim, and my father was one of the first to daven at the Kosel Maravi, Ro'ah b'kach techilas hisgashmu shel havtachos Rabba Chofetz Chaim. He saw within this the beginning of the fruition of that promise the Chofetz Chaim spoke about. So he learned in Radin for some time. He was a brilliant young man with a restless soul, and he traveled. He was looking for the Rebbe, for the Torah that would really speak to him. He went to Volozhin, and he was there as well, in the great yeshiva of Volozhin, shortly after the passing of the Netziv. And then he went to Slobodka. And in Slobodka, he became very close with Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein, the great Rosh Yeshiva in Slobodka. But he was always yearning and looking for something different, something more. He began reading some of the writings of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, and then somehow he chanced upon some of the writings and the ideas of Rav Kook. Now, in the beginning of World War II, fast forward to 1914, the Nazir was in Europe, and he was exploring different forms of academics, both Jewish and secular, in philosophy, and dabbling and probing. Rav Kook, who at the time was the chief rabbi of Yafo, he was in Europe. He actually came in for an Agudas Yisrael conference of Rabbanim, but then he was stuck there because of the outbreak of World War I, and he ended up staying in Europe for years. So Rav Dovid Cohen had an acquaintance who was also friendly with the Mishpacha Rav Kook, and he asked Rav Dovid Cohen, would you like, I could try to make an introduction. And this is the letter, the bottom of page 5, we have the letter that Rav Dovid Cohen himself wrote to Rav Kook asking permission to come and ask him a few questions. With a feeling of inadequacy, I approach the great Rav. Nichne v'talmud, I come humbled like a disciple. Haratzon l'tov yasieni levakesh hashefa, I want to come and gain from the wellspring of this great personality is avek ba'ofer raglav, to be able to really sit in the dust of his feet. Ve'im ki rav ha'merchach mimakom mimeni, and although you might be far away from me both geographically and your madrega, nonetheless, the Torah mipiv u'musar svosav etzape, I just yearn to hear a little bit of your hadracha, your guidance, and your musar. V'im hakelim einam muchanim lekabel berchas Hashem, and if the vessel, referring to himself, is not yet ready, it's not strong enough to accept, to be able to receive the blessing of God, bo litaher hineni, I'm coming because I want to purify myself. Ritzoni lovo lemako moshav teraso lezakos lehonos mizivo, and I'm asking permission to come and to bask in your glory. So if I was Rav Kook and I received the text like this, I would have responded, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. Right? Hatzlacha. However, Rav Kook, though, in his Chasidus and his Anoah, he said, listen, you're welcome to come by any time. I'd love to schmooze. What we related on Shabbos was paraphrasing the actual story that took place when Rav Dovid Cohen arrived at the Kimchi family. He found that Rav Kook was there sitting with his son. They were learning Torah together, and he felt awkward interrupting, but Rav Kook looked up, he had a big smile, he invited him in, and they had a conversation, but it was a very mundane, very trite conversation, to the point where Rav Dovid Cohen was feeling a little bit anxious. I came here for more than schmoozing about what I've been doing and my university studies and philosophy. I want HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he stays the night. He stays the night on the bottom floor, and Rav Kook was staying on the second floor. And here we'll read together the letter that Rav Dovid Cohen wrote after his meeting with Rav Kook, his second meeting. This is actually in the beginning of the Oros Kodesh, like we mentioned, the sefer that he put together for Rav Kook, compiling all of or many of his ideas and hashkafos. Rav Dovid Cohen writes, more than 27 years ago I found myself in Switzerland. And there I was studying philosophy, Malei Tzimon v'shkeika le'emes, but I had such a thirst and a drive for truth. I heard that Rav Kook was also in Switzerland, and therefore I sent a letter asking permission to see him. And he responded that I'm okay, I'm allowed to come. So what did I do that day? Acharei Tevila b'mei Rhine, I was Tovel, I went to the mikveh in the Rhine River. I had my Shar Kedosha from Reb Chaim Vital, Shar Kedusha, with me, ready to go, Molei Suffolk. And I had such a feeling of hesitation and inadequacy. Asisi es darchai leHaRav, and I made my way to the Rav, and it happened to be Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul, really the 28th of Menachem Av, Tuf Reish Ayin Hey, 1915. When I arrived, I saw him learning with his son, and we had a very superficial conversation, and then I stayed the night. And here's where his life changed. Al mishkavi lo shachav libi. As I was laying in bed, my heart would not allow me to sleep. Gorol chaya hayu al kapos maznayim. I felt like the fate of my life was really hanging in the balance. V'hinei boker hashkem ve'eshma kol tzadim heina ve'heina. The early morning came, and I heard footsteps going back and forth. B'berachas hashachar, tfilas ha'akeda, Bashir v'nigun elyon. I heard the Berachas HaShachar and the Tfilas HaKeda in such a beautiful melody, in a Shir v'nigun elyon, Mishmei Shmei Kedem. It sounded angelic, it was celestial. V'akshiv, and I thought to myself, Hinei nepachti v'ayisi li'ish acher. At that moment in time, being exposed to the godless, to the majestic soul of Rav Kook, I felt like I was transformed into a different human being. Ki yoser me'asher pelalti matzasi. More than I planned, more than I hoped for. My vision was to come here and ask a few questions and get some good, solid answers. But more than that, matzasi li Rav, I found a Rebbe. This was the beginning of his relationship with Rav Kook, and really the experience that changed his life for decades to come. Rav Kook saw within Rav Dovid Cohen this real tamimistic desire to grow, and he really took him under his wings as a Talmud. Rav Kook himself eventually, when he was able to, he went back to Eretz Yisrael, and he became the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim and then of Eretz Yisrael, and he founded his yeshiva in 1922, now known as Mirkaz HaRav, and he invited Rav Dovid Cohen to join him in the establishment of the yeshiva. 1922, Rav Dovid Cohen makes Aliyah, and there, Kava Oso L'Rav HaMuvak, finally now he has a kaviyas. He's actually living in the house of Rav Kook for years, being a Talmud Muvak, a loyal disciple of Rav Kook, and at the same time being a Magid Shir in the yeshiva. The letter that Rav Dovid Cohen writes to Rav Kook when they were separated, just to quote you a few lines to get a little bit of a glimpse into that kesher nafshi, that relationship they had. He writes, as we're apart, Ki cholas ava ani, I am sick in love. Ki cholas ava ani, sar tzilo me'aleinu, pana zivo, pana hodo. Paraphrasing from Chazal and Rashi, that when you've left, I feel like the radiance and the Kedusha has also left. L'mi esaper sod misosrei chovi. Who can I share my secrets with? Who can I be real with? L'mi egala pitzei nafshi. Who can I reveal the disturbances of my soul? Ubahaster ponim ha'isi nivel. Paraphrasing from David HaMelech, he says, when you're not here, I just feel bewildered without you. When he moved to Eretz Yisrael, at this point in time, he took on the oath of Nazirus. Why he did so is not abundantly clear, but besides the basic restrictions of Nazirus, right, he didn't shave, he didn't get a haircut, he stayed away from anything made from grapes, he would use apple cider for Kiddush and for the Dalet Kosos and Pesach. Now he was a Kohen, so there was no need to stay away from Tumas Mason. He did that anyway. But he had many other restrictions that he took upon himself, all based on this journey of Ruchnius. One well-known thing is that the Nazir was a vegetarian. He didn't eat anything from meat derivatives, nor did he wear clothing that was made from leather. He wanted to be Purish Me'olam Hazeh, be totally separate and distinct from this world in the most radical way possible. He was one where, although he was brilliant and he had a background in 9 different languages that he knew fluently, he would only speak Lashon HaKodesh, but he would speak rarely. Tainus Dibur was something that he embraced as part of his avoda, which means there were many times where he chose not to speak at all. He felt that in Hashkafa, the ruchnius that one can glean from a conversation or interaction is much more through the shmiya, the listening to what someone else has to say, than by one's own dibur. Every Shabbos he wouldn't speak. The same thing was true on Yantif. And then for 40 days from Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur, he wouldn't speak either. It's interesting. The same thing is said about Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer, one of the 3 main disciples of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, that he took upon himself a tainus dibur. He didn't speak from Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur. And there was one exception, which was when his wife had a baby, he said Mazel Tov. Again, this is all under the category of things not to try at home if you want to stay married and you want to stay normal. But a glimpse into the secret world of HaRav HaNazir Dovid Cohen. Another letter that he writes now, living in Eretz Yisrael, together with Rav Kook. The bottom of page 7, the Nazir writes, I'm sitting in the heart of Israel, in the heart of Jerusalem, the holy city, and in the house of the Gadol Hador, the central point of all of the wisdom of Israel, encompassing everything and everyone. And his heart is full of tender, deep, passionate emotion. His mind is full of sharpness and brilliance and knowledge. He's a genius. He's an investigator. He's a tzaddik, a tamim, a chassid. He's humble, yet he's proud like Hillel. And more than the calf wants to nurse, the mother wants to nourish, meaning to say, more than the student wants to gain and derive from the wellspring of Rav Kook, the Rav himself wants to give. There's a story told of Chaim Yaakov Levin, who was in the yeshiva Merkaz HaRav, that in Yom Kippur there was an early minyan that took place from a different group of Yerushalmis living in the same community, and they would daven in a different place in the yeshiva. So his father told him to please wake up early Yom Kippur morning and to go open up for that early minyan. Now the door has been locked all night, so Rabbi Yaakov Levin, as a young man, goes and he starts to unlock the door of the Beis Medrash. But as he's doing so, he hears this shira, this singing from a distance. It's coming from inside the shul, but how's that possible? It's been locked all night. So he opens the door and with curiosity he peeks in and he sees Rav Dovid Cohen is standing there by the stender saying over and over again, Ashreichem Yisrael lifnei mi'atem metarim, quoting the words of Rabbi Akiva, Ashreichem Yisrael, singing it with the shira, with the nigun, over and over again, until he couldn't help himself but interrupt him. How did you get in? And the answer was, I never left. He found out afterwards that the minig of Rav Dovid Cohen was Yom Kippur, from Kol Nidre until Ne'ilah. He would stand the entire 25 hours. He would either be immersed in tefillah or immersed in shira. And what he did, the majority of the night, was stand there by the stender, singing shiras v'tishbachos v'ashereichem Yisrael. How fortunate we are to have this relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We had the question in the beginning of the shir from the Sam Derech of Simcha Zisel Brody. On one hand, the Nazir brings the carbon because he was refraining from wine and not partaking from some of the pleasures of this world. And that's a problem. Pleasures are here to enjoy. On the other hand, he brings the carbon because now he's having Yerida. He's going back down to a normal existence. That's problematic. How are both of these ideas true? So explains Rav Simcha Zisel Brody, it's not a contradiction. It could be, before the person chooses to become a Nazir, if you were to ask a shayla right there and then, is this the right thing for me to do? Likely the answer could be no, because it might be too much. You might be restricting yourself to a degree that's unhealthy. Don't take on that oath. However, 30 days later, after living the uplifted, exalted reality of Nazirus, at that point in time, you're a different human being. It's only been 30 days, but when you're able to transform yourself radically, even for a short time, you're now on a different level of existence. And now, how could you possibly think of having your Rida, of coming back down into what everyone else is doing, and enjoying the wine and the Gashmias of Olam Hazeh? Stay where you are. Look at how much you've accomplished. The most powerful and practical lesson of the Nazir, I think for all of us to take with us, assuming we're not going to become Nazirim, is that changing oneself even momentarily, even temporarily, can change you forever. I'll give you an example. Right, if somebody theoretically, he goes on a crazy diet and he loses 30 pounds, and it's amazing, and everyone's complimenting him, well, you look great. But there's no way to maintain that kind of lifestyle. 3 weeks later, he's back where he started from. What did he accomplish? At this point in time, nothing really. What did he gain? 30 pounds. That's it. The fact that you lost weight then, it wasn't able to stay with you. You didn't change your whole mahalach hachayim, so you're back to where you are. When it comes to ruchnius, when it comes to any spiritual elevation, something we're able to take on, even temporarily, even just for a moment, I'm holding myself back from saying something that I know is going to be hurtful, but I want to say it, but I'm not going to say it. Or pushing myself to do something that's challenging, even though I know I'm probably not going to push myself tomorrow. That level of aliyah, of growth in spirituality, is something that can stay with you and transforms you forever. I think this is one very practical and powerful lesson of Nazirus. I want to end, though, the discussion with the concluding words of Rav Shar Yoshev Cohen, again, the son of the Nazir. He said, it's interesting, the day my father met Rav Kook for the first time, we mentioned, was the 28th of Menachem Av. And every year on that day, he would travel, and he would be Makabel Pnei Rabbo, he would greet his great Rebbe, meaning once he moved to Eretz Yisrael. Then during the last few days of his life, as he was struggling, and at the same time trying to smile and trying to to help us cope with the eventual loss. Kasher nachnu b'nei beso hayinu malei charada. We were filled with fear, with worry, with hope, with tefillah. We had so many different mixed emotions. Re'inu es yomav achronim, but we saw his last days. Ma'akvo hanora im oso sheker. He was battling with that sheker, the falsehood, the illusion of death. And we didn't understand. Ad shenisgala lono hasod hanora azeh, until it was revealed to us, this amazing secret, kishenistalik mina olam, that we realized the day that he left this world, ba'oso hayom mamish, b'chav ches menachem av, tav shin lamen beis. He ended up passing away in the 1970s on the same exact day that his life was changed forever, the 28th of Av. To end our discussion here, there was a hesped, a eulogy said by Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, where he spoke about the unique and the great personality of HaRav HaNazir Dovid Cohen. And Lamaisa, unfortunately, we could very much relate to the words that we're about to read, now that we're all suffering the loss of Rav Gershon Edelstein, who was really the Manhig Hador at this point. He was the guiding light of Klal Yisrael. Rav Soloveitchik quotes from Chazal, Mi yitein lonu tumoroso. Who can give us his replacement? Who could fill that void? And explain Rav Soloveitchik, if these words were true in the time of Chazal, then living in a time where there's so much darkness and there's so much confusion, when you lose a Gadol b'Yisrael, then how much more so do we say, Mi yitein lanu tumoroso? Who's going to fill that void? What do we do with this loss? Mi yitein lanu odem Gadol kamoso. Who will give us someone of the stature of HaRav Cohen David Cook? He was the Somel HaMusar, he was the paradigm of Musar, of tznius, of humility. He was a Baki, he was a Charif, he was a master of so many areas of Torah. Mi yitein lanu es hatamimus v'hapashtus. Who will give us, who will arise with that level of purity and simplicity? Sh'nisarachzu b'nishmaso, that somehow we're all woven together in his expansive neshama. The only sefer that was published by Rav Dovid Cohen is a sefer called Kol Nevuah. Kol Nevuah is really many different ideas that he worked on for years. And there are hundreds and hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of manuscripts that have still not really been researched well, because the majority of his life he spent on organizing the Svarim of Rav Kook. But Rav Soloveitchik writes, I had the opportunity to go through some of the Sefer Kol HaNevuah, and I was able to see immediately Odem shekol tamtzis chayev misbatas bepasik tzomel lecha nafshi. Right here, the author of this sefer was a human being where the entire mantra of his life was tzomel lecha nafshi, my neshama thirsts for you, Hashem. This was who he was. And I felt as I was reading through the Kol HaNevuah, it was as if the Baal Shem Tov or the Baal Tanya, a neshama like that, was speaking to me. Achein be'emes, the truth is, Mishenichen b'chush matim yochel liros, one who reads the words and listens to the voice of the Nazir through his own sefer, he's able to feel and to see Eich nishmoso shel HaRav Kook zatzal ma'iro mavhika mimenu michtavav, that the very powerful and eloquent soul of Rav Kook was speaking through the pen of HaRav HaNazir Dovid Cohen. He concludes by saying, Kadosh Baruch Hu should be menachem, should send comfort to all of Klal Yisrael, and we walk away from this knowing about perhaps not the last Nazir, but a very impressive Nazir in Klal Yisrael. And although we will not take on the oath of Nazirus, but we will hopefully strive for a little bit more in Ruchnius, knowing that even if we have a Yerida tomorrow, that temporary Aliyah can and will change us forever. Shkoyach.